Next on Currents News, it is now the longest government shutdown in U.S. history, and neither side is budging to get the budget passed. A federal judge blocking the Trump administration's new rules on birth control coverage in over a dozen states. Plus this.
The Brooklyn Diocese celebrates a special mass for pilgrims traveling to Panama, joining young Catholics and Pope Francis for World Youth Day. I'm Tim Harfman, and that story is coming up.
And the Filipino community celebrating the Feast of Santo Niño. Find out the history behind the strong devotion. All that and more now on the news. Good evening, everyone. I'm Liz Faublas. It's day 24 of the government shutdown, now the longest in U.S. history, and President Trump is not budging on his demands. This as many federal workers missed their first paychecks on Friday. Camila Bernal is in Washington with the latest.
Snowy scenes in Washington, mirroring the frozen state of negotiations over the government shutdown.
Make no mistake, to me, this shutdown is caused by President Trump.
The Democrats are stopping us.
President Trump began week 4 of the shutdown, backing off a recent threat to use executive power to fund his $5.7 billion border wall.
I'm not looking to call a national emergency. This is so simple, you shouldn't have to.
But any hope of progress to reopen the government this week appears slim, with no meetings scheduled or new proposals on the table. Meanwhile, millions of Americans across the country are feeling the sting, including at the nation's busiest airports.
TSA workers just below us, assisting travelers, making sure that we are safe as we travel to Washington, D.C., and are doing it without a paycheck.
Roughly 51,000 TSA screeners are working without pay. Hundreds have called out sick since this shutdown began, causing backups at some major airports. Lines sneaked all the way to baggage claim at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport in Atlanta on Monday. Air traffic controllers also feeling the effects.
Morale is just funneling down, just as fast as you can imagine.
Despite the understaffing issues, officials say it's still safe to fly. Travelers just might need to budget more wait time.
We're going to keep everybody safe. That's what we do.
Camila Bernal, Currents News.
The partial government shutdown will not keep pro-lifers away from the nation's capital this Friday. Hundreds of thousands of people are expected to descend on D.C.'s National Mall for the annual March for Life, the world's largest pro-life event that seeks to overturn Roe v. Wade. Organizers say they've been fighting against abortion for 45 years and won't be deterred by the shutdown. Currents News will provide team coverage of the 46th annual March for Life from Washington, D.C. this Friday, January 18th. Emily Drewby will be at the National Mall, and Christopher White will be talking with us and filing exclusive reports beginning this Thursday. A federal judge has blocked the Trump administration from enforcing rule changes that would allow more employers to opt out of plans that provide women with no-cost birth control on religious grounds. California Judge Haywood Gilliam Jr. argued that women would be forced to turn to state-funded programs for birth control and experience unintended pregnancies. The decision came one day before the new rules were set to go into effect in 14 states, including New York and the District of Columbia. Pilgrims from the Diocese of Brooklyn attending World Youth Day in Panama celebrated a special mass today. Next week, they'll join thousands of other Catholics and Pope Francis to strengthen their faith. Currents News' Tim Harfman has the story from Douglaston, Queens.
Pilgrims gathering in prayer at the Immaculate Conception Center in Douglaston. Nearly 200 Catholics from Brooklyn and Queens flying to Panama for World Youth Day, a time to strengthen their faith through prayer, music, and fellowship.
It's going to be great. It's going to be like a scaled down version of the church. We're going to feel like we're really part of something bigger.
The Panamanian government expecting nearly 200,000 young Catholics, ranging from 16 to 35 years old. Father Gerard Sauer, director of pilgrimages for the Brooklyn Diocese, encourages pilgrims to hear God's call.
Just remain open to what they see, to what they hear, to what they experience, and to not just make it something World Youth Day is over. No, how did that impact my faith life?
Some of the highlights of the journey: Stations of the Cross, led by the Holy Father, the Vigil, which includes praying silently in front of the Blessed Sacrament, and the closing Mass.
I'm pretty excited to go. Last time I went was in Poland, and I got to see the Pope and just meet a bunch of Catholics from around the world, and it was just like a really exciting experience.
I feel like it would be a very good experience trying to increase my faith.
Since St. Pope John Paul II started World Youth Day in 1985, this will be the third time the international gathering will take place in Latin America. In Douglaston, Queens, Tim Harfman, Currents News.
Currents News will provide coverage of World Youth Day live from Panama later this month. National correspondent for the Tablet and Crux, Christopher White, Crux Rome Bureau Chief Inez San Martin, who will be traveling with the Pope, and Currents News' Tim Harfman will be on the ground. Coverage begins January 24th at 9:45 a.m. Also tonight, in a newly published letter, Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano is urging Archbishop Theodore McCarrick to publicly repent. Writing to the former Archbishop of Washington, D.C., Archbishop Vigano says time is running out and that McCarrick's eternal salvation is at stake because of his crimes against minors and seminarians. Vigano is pushing McCarrick to make a public act of repentance that could bring healing to a, quote, gravely wounded and suffering church. Almost a year to the date of Pope Francis's troubled visit to Chile, a delegation of bishops from the South American country have met with the Holy Father to fill him in on a progress report. The 5-member committee requested the meeting to brief Pope Francis on their efforts to address the clergy sex abuse crisis and to plot a future plan of action. During his visit last year, the Holy Father blamed the Chilean hierarchy for decades of abuse and pressured every active bishop to offer their resignation. Kurdish forces in Syria say they feel abandoned by America after its decision to pull troops out of the war-torn country. They fear Turkey will soon launch an attack. President Trump did issue a stern warning to the neighboring country, but Kurdish forces say that's not enough. Clarissa Ward has more from northern Syria.
In Kobani, the graves of Kurdish fighters are still fresh. 27-year-old Mahmoud Rasul was killed less than 2 weeks ago in an ISIS ambush near the town of Deir Zur. Get up, my son. I beg you, his mother Najma weeps. These are the people left behind to mourn. Now they are bracing for the moment they will be left behind again as the U.S. begins to withdraw its forces from Syria. They got what they wanted. They used the Kurds to get rid of ISIS, and now they're leaving us, Nejma says. America was supposed to have our back.
Almost every family in this town has lost someone in this war. And the very real fear here now is that when the Americans leave, there will be war here once again.
Just across the border is Turkey, which views the Syrian Kurds as terrorists. To the west is the brutal regime of Bashar al-Assad and its Russian and Iranian backers. Kurdish military commander Sharfan Darwish tells us the Americans provided the Kurds with a buffer. In return, the Kurds took the fight to ISIS. After all those years that we fought terrorism together, he says, it's their minimum duty to help guarantee our security. After an exhausting battle against ISIS, the Kurds may now have to defend themselves against more powerful enemies alone. Clarissa Ward, Northern Syria.
Saudi Arabia's Minister of Energy is being criticized for his lack of empathy toward the death of murdered journalist Jamal Khashoggi. In an interview, Khalid Al-Falih said Khashoggi's death didn't do anything to disrupt Saudi-U.S. ties.
I think there's just too many areas of common interests, common values between the U.S. And Saudi Arabia to even consider that this unfortunate and tragic incident in Turkey would have been a major disruption to such a strong historic relationship.
When asked about the lingering doubts that the Saudi crown prince was involved in Khashoggi's death, Falih said the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is solidly behind King Salman and the leadership. New developments in the deadly crash of Lion Air Flight 610 that crashed off the coast of Indonesia last October. The second black box has been found. Back in November, divers found the flight data recorder. The voice recorder can now reveal what the pilots aboard the flight were saying and why their safety feature was not turned off. There's a lot more news headed your way. Outrage over a museum display in Israel. A fast food mascot is placed on the cross. Plus this.
It's one of the smallest chapels in Brooklyn and or Queens.
This is the gospel of the Lord.
But it's serving one of the largest groups, and you might not even know about it. I'm Emily Druby, and that story is coming up.
The Filipino community in Brooklyn gathering to celebrate the Feast of Santo Niño, how this statue helped bring Christianity to the island. Do you have a story idea or want to share a tip? Email us at newstips@desalesmedia.org or call our 24-hour number 718-517-3122. We will be right back. Music and dance fill a Diocese of Brooklyn church to celebrate a strong devotion Filipinos celebrate around the world. It's the story of Santo Niño, a small image with a big history. Currents News' Katie Engesser has more about the 30-centimeter figure that gave birth to Christianity in the Philippines.
A strong devotion through dance at the Basilica of Our Lady of Perpetual Help in Sunset Park. The star of the show, the infant Christ, known as the Santo Niño in the Philippines.
I have a devotion for him, and I cannot express how much I depend on him.
All this represent thankful to Santo Niño because this is the one that make us Christian.
The image of the Christ child dates back almost 500 years when explorer Ferdinand Magellan set sail. Magellan landed on the island of Cebu in the Philippines and began spreading the message of Christianity. And it worked. The king and queen of Cebu and 800 other natives became Christian. When the queen was baptized, she was presented with the Santo Niño. Now, millions of Filipino people head to Cebu every January for the feast.
The day-to-day visits of pilgrims to that shrine is just a testimony to the faith of the Filipino people.
Auxiliary Bishop of Brooklyn, James Massa, once led a delegation from Brooklyn to the Philippines for an international Eucharistic Congress.
It's a devotion that's visceral, that really comes from deep within. And it's the image and the Catholic faith, has really held the people together.
And the faithful continue that tradition in Brooklyn.
It is very important because it symbolizes that kind of unity and being a Catholic. So it's just, we were born to it.
It revitalizes our zest for life.
In Sunset Park, Katie Engesser, Currents News.
Over the weekend, the Catholic Church also commemorated the solemnity of the baptism of the Lord. At the Vatican, Pope Francis celebrated by baptizing several newborns in the Sistine Chapel. In his homily, the Holy Father expressed that it is the parents who are responsible for transmitting the faith at home through their example.
Scusatemi, ma io vi consiglio, mai litigate davanti ai bambini, mai. È normale che gli sposi litigano, è normale. Sarebbe strano di no. Fatelo, ma che loro non sentano, che loro non vedano.
The Holy Father baptized 12 baby boys and 15 baby girls. It's one of the smallest chapels in the Brooklyn Diocese, but it makes a big impact, and it's right in the middle of an international airport. Currents News' Emily Druby takes us inside.
It's Monday afternoon, a Mass being celebrated at JFK's Terminal 4.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
An airport is not a place many would expect to worship, but Mass is celebrated almost daily at Our Lady of the Skies Chapel.
This is the second oldest chapel, airport chapel in the world.
The chapel has a rich history.
Chalice Pope Paul VI used when he was in New York.
It was founded in 1955 by a soldier back from World War II who had promised Mary he would do something special for her if he made it home alive. In 2001, 2 spaces later, this room was created, and it houses the chapel to this day. This is a full-service chapel. They perform weddings, baptisms. They even have an area where people can light a candle and give an offering.
With my daily difficulties that I go through at my work, managing the workforce and everything else, and I come here and reflect upon it, and the day goes very well after that.
Chaplain Father Chris Piasta says they provide services for employees and those passing through the airport.
Because wherever there are people, there are problems, and that's where the church is supposed to be.
TSA employees are experiencing problems right now, working without pay during the government shutdown.
There's many people who are not getting money right now. They're thinking, how are we going to pay their bills? I don't see them willing to talk about it, but I see an uptick of these people coming and stepping into the chapel. When I approach them and ask them about it, they just, kind of close their eyes. So they rely on prayer.
In the past, that has included everything from those suffering from loss to those stranded due to major events. A place of solace and a place to pray in the middle of what sometimes can be chaos. In Jamaica, Emily Druby, Currents News.
According to the U.S. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, 1 in 5 Americans are currently weighed down with delinquent debt concerning health care. Just before the Christmas break, I sat down with the co-founder of RIP Medical Debt, Craig Antico, and asked him about the inspiration behind his company, which aims to forgive medical debt.
2 parts. One was my partner, Jerry Ashton, is more of a, he's an activist. So when he heard about Occupy Wall Street, of all things, he went down to Zuccotti Park. He only lived a couple of train stations down. And he was a Navy journalist, so he actually brought his pad and he started interviewing people, chronicling this movement. And it was about disparity and inequity. And he says, Craig, this is really for real down here. I said, oh, that's interesting. I just came across some other people that are down here, and they want to abolish medical debt. He said, they asked me, what do you think of this, Jerry? We're going to raise $50,000. We're going to buy $1 million of medical debt, and then we're going to abolish it. And he goes, I think that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
So the inspiration wasn't right away.
It wasn't right away. Well, what happened was they came up with this idea, so we were inspired by it, but we actually helped them abolish over $40 million.
How do you go about doing that?
You go to the providers, the doctors, the hospitals, even the collectors, the people that actually buy debt to collect it. There's a market for that.
Okay.
And then we buy it just the same price that an investor would buy it for, but instead of collecting on it, we wipe it out, take it off their credit report. So we're using a mechanism that's used to make money, and we're using it in reverse. We're not a collection agency, we're a collection debt forgiver.
Quantify this a little bit more for us, Craig. How much money has RIP actually allotted to helping patients with crippling debt?
We have abolished over $400 million of medical debt for almost 250,000 people. Now, people come to us and say, can you help me? Well, I can't help people directly.
Okay.
What I do is, I'm able to go to a hospital and say, here, you have $100 million of debt from 100,000 people. They can't pay you. They might not ever pay you. Or, like you said with your mother, she might actually pay more than she should.
Yeah,
and at the end of the month, she might not have enough to pay for food or decide not to go to the doctor. Well, we're trying to take that hardship away. And what we do is we'll tell to the hospital, we'll tell them, we'll buy that $100 million of debt for $750,000 or $1 million. And sometimes you do things that are way out there to help other people. And you really need to know, am I doing the right thing?
How much did your faith play in this?
Oh my God. I mean, if it wasn't for my faith, I wouldn't have done it, because I just knew it would work. But it took 2.5 to 3 years before I could even take a salary.
So you put yourself at risk to help other people. Is that the way you were seeing it?
That's how it was. It was. My wife would say, why are we going into debt to help people get out of debt? I'm like, because we're the only ones that can really do this. I come from the collection industry. I know it. But I didn't know how it was going to work. We had to be miracle ready for it to happen.
In the time we have left, Craig, as I told you, I'm fearful for my parents because they're aging and they're really ill. If someone is drowning in medical debt, how can they contact you for help?
Yeah, they don't contact me for help. What they do is they have to know their rights. When they go to a hospital, for example, they have to know if they make less than 2 times the poverty level, they get charity care from that hospital. No charge. So you have to know your rights.
Okay, Craig, thank you so much for being here. This is such an important topic. I really appreciate your
You're
insight.
welcome. Thank you so much, Liz.
Christian leaders in Israel are calling out a Finnish artist for a sculpture they're saying is an insult to Christianity. The display is a sculpture of a crucified Ronald McDonald currently hanging at the Haifa Museum of Art. Patriarchs and other heads of the church in Jerusalem strongly condemned the image, calling it irresponsible and provocative. Hundreds of Christians even took to the streets to protest the piece. Still to come on Currents News, gone too soon. New York says goodbye to one of its heroes killed in a tragic accident. The funeral of firefighter Stephen Pollard is next. Last Friday, we aired a pre-recorded special edition of Currents News. Therefore, we were not able to report on the funeral of New York firefighter Stephen Pollard. We'd like to do that now. Thousands lined the streets of Brooklyn to say a final goodbye to the hero. Currents News' Tim Harfman has the story.
Firefighters wheel Stephen Pollard's casket down the aisle. Family, friends, and FDNY members packing the pews of Good Shepherd Church in Marine Park, Brooklyn. The 30-year-old was with the department a year and a half, assigned to Ladder Company 170 in Canarsie. FDNY chaplain Monsignor John DeLendick celebrated the Mass as Brooklyn Auxiliary Bishop Neil Tiedemann presided. Fire Commissioner Daniel Nigro said Pollard excelled in the academy and was everything the FDNY wants in a firefighter.
This young man was strong, smart, hardworking, dedicated, and above all, he was brave.
Firefighter Timothy Klein called Pollard a hero.
Stephen Pollard died not thinking of himself, but trying to help others. We lost a true hero that night. Stevie, it breaks my heart to know that the days working alongside you are over. Though your time as a fireman was short, the impact you made and the example you set will live on in the hearts of Canarsie forever.
Pollard was the 1,151st member of the department to die in the line of duty. A service followed the Mass at Brooklyn's Greenwood Cemetery Crematory Chapel. In Marine Park, Brooklyn, Tim Harfman, Currents News.
Our prayers remain with the Pollard family. That is Currents News. I'm Liz Faublas. Thank you so much for joining us because we are putting your faith in the news. I hope to see you again next time.